I don't suppose anybody was invited to the Taylor Swift wedding, were they? Anybody have any inside scoops on that one? I mean, you never know. 1,000 people. That's a okay. Freedom. One of the things that occurred to me while I was preparing for this morning, leading up to today, as has been the case pretty much every year when I have had the opportunity to offer a sermon around the 4th of July, I think quite a bit about the concept of freedom. Um, and when especially, I don't know why, but especially this year, I felt compelled to share with you a truth that there's no doubt you already know. But if you have never spent any time in a role like this one as a minister or in any kind of pastoral way, one of the things I just wanted to tell you was there is never, ever enough time in a week to write a really good sermon. I don't know why I felt compelled to tell you that. I don't feel like I'm trying to make excuses. But it really, this week in particular, and the concept of freedom and the many, many ways to approach it, just reminded me all over again as I sat and wrestled with this almost every single day this week, just how impossible it is sometimes to really wrangle something deep and meaningful out of an idea, a concept, something that's part of our lives. The other thing I wanted to share, and I don't know quite why I wanted to tell you this, but I have never kept any of my sermons. Sometimes people ask me if I'll send it to them after I offer it, and if I remember, then I do, but I always delete what I've written and what I say. And I think it's because a number of years ago, when I was really struggling with, writing or delivering a sermon, a person I know who had been a minister for a long time said, well, just dig out an old one. And I thought, oh, golly, that never even occurred to me. But at the same time, I thought, what a bad idea. Because what's the point? If you're not going to wrestle with an idea on a regular basis in a new and fresh way, what is the point of trying, really? And so I may have really sort of done myself a disservice. I don't know. but I have never been one to save. I like to be able to start from a fresh place and think anew. I also want you to know all of that because it's the reason why pastors need time off. Because if you don't get a break from a Sunday every once in a while, you burn out pretty quickly. So having said all of that, one of the things that was happening for me this week was I was thinking a lot back to 1976 when I was in 5th grade that year at Lake Avenue School. And I was thinking about all of the ways that we honored the bicentennial that year. There was something called the Freedom Train. Does anybody remember that? Was that something I made up? No, there was a real thing that traveled around the country, right? And it had different displays. Can anybody remember better than I what happened with that? But you remember the idea of it, the Freedom Train? Yeah. But I just recall that we did it seemed like we did, I was young, but we did in the school, we were obviously out of school at the time, but that time I recall really very fondly. Thinking about the celebration of the anniversary of the birth of this nation and all that meant and what it meant to be a country. And I spent a lot of time when I was young. I was a teacher. And every summer for the first several years of teaching, I just got in my car or truck, whatever I had, and drove around this country. And the only place I haven't been yet is Hawaii. And I'm not really sure why. I will someday. And I did it a number of times. Partly because I was young and I loved camping and mountain biking and all that stuff, but also it was really intriguing to me to experience how incredibly diverse this country is. I hope you've had the opportunity to do some traveling around the United States because whatever the different areas of the country are really like individual countries. And it gave me an appreciation for the incredible diversity of this nation and how hard it really must be to create anything vaguely cohesive among the population, because everyone in each area, they're all so unique. And I found wherever I went, it didn't matter wherever I was, back roads, small towns, big cities, people were so nice. People were so kind. Everywhere I went, people were helpful. This was, of course, when maps were paper. I stayed in youth hostels and met people along the way. People were always genuinely kind. And I was very curious always to find out why people liked living where they were living. That's a really good, just go out and travel and ask people that question wherever you go. What is it that you like about this place? And it's a wonderful discovery to make of why people like, their little town in Arkansas, or, a city in Maine, or wherever you are. It's a really, really wonderful thing. And it gave me at a young age a really huge appreciation for this place. And I have gone completely off script in only wanting to tell you that I had been thinking about 1976, but also during this past week with my limited time, just looking around in my own life and wherever I was for evidence of the idea of freedom. It's a really gnarly concept, really. And one of the things, whenever this has come up for me year after year, I think about my vantage point, because I feel like I've never not had freedom. So I don't really know what it's like to be in a life where I don't have this much freedom. It's very difficult to talk about freedom from the perspective of somebody who has pretty much my entire life had a tremendous amount of freedom. But one of the things that happened this week was my brother and his family came east from California. And if you've the last several weeks or so, I made mention of this situation a couple of times. My 13-year-old nephew, Dylan, had a very profound issue with his brain. It was called an AVM. So for the last 2 years, that family, my brother, his wife, and two boys, have been in the medical world at Stanford. Profound seizures, a regular radiation treatment. And recently, not that long ago, Dylan was given a clean bill of health, which was a miracle. Thank you. It was a miracle, and his entire team of doctors couldn't believe it either. He's actually sort of becoming a study now. They're looking at his case because it was so unusual. So they came east because Dylan wanted to go to Camp Chingachgook, where my brother had gone when he was young. And it was just the most amazing thing, because I haven't seen them in these 2 years while they were in this world. And what I noticed about them is that they're free. They are living a version of freedom. They had lived for the past few years completely constrained by that terrible diagnosis and the fear that they were living in on a daily basis, that Dylan could have a profound seizure. And in fact, twice he was brought back to life. So I really watched them when I was with them, being joyful, laughing, being themselves. And I thought, that's really freedom. That is a kind of freedom. And it was really, really beautiful to witness that. I saw them exhibiting true gratitude for everything that they were able to do. And it also triggered thoughts for me around the time of COVID, when I think all of us felt a really severe lack of freedom for a while. Remember when we couldn't really leave our homes? We weren't allowed at certain points to travel across state lines. Do you remember that? I mean, I was working in hospice then, so I was allowed to go across state lines, but we weren't allowed to go. It was a very interesting time. Do you guys all remember how constrained we were in terms of? And for many of us, maybe that was one of the few times in our lives when we felt that way, that real loss of freedom to do what we were just doing on a regular basis, living our lives. So for me, I think the only times when my freedoms have been limited have had to do with medical situations and also with the time of COVID. But of course, freedom becomes this time of year the defining word in most of our conversations, and especially in the national conversation. And we turn to the historical documents, the history of this country, the laws that we have that allow us our freedoms. And so in thinking about it from a pastoral perspective, what I understand to be true is that those kinds of conversations about that kind of freedom, political freedom, personal freedoms, are what we have that establish the conditions of our lives, right? It's like it's the framework of our lives. And within that framework, we have the opportunity to live with dignity as human beings and hopefully not in fear. From a theological perspective, I would say that that's the starting point in life. And then each of us individually from that point, from that level of freedom, have a really important task as human beings. And that really is to figure out, what do we do with all that freedom? How do we live our lives? Any theology, any faith tradition is asking us on a very regular basis to dig deeper than what we have on the surface of our lives, to go below the world, the material world that we live in, to encounter the more eternal concept of spiritual freedom. Hopefully you've spent some time contemplating this. What does it mean? Hopefully I don't have to explain it, but I'll roll a little of it out. Political freedom, individual freedoms, speak, as we know, to what we are and are not allowed to do. The freedoms that we have as citizens of this country create the framework from within which we function. Spiritual freedom takes it from there and involves, I would say, a different set of questions. Ones that have to do with what kind of human being we are in the process of becoming. What kind of person are we choosing to be given the world in which we exist? Spiritual questions ask things like whether we have learned to govern ourselves well, whether our lives have become ordered toward what is true and good, whether we have become less prone toward things like fear or pride or resentment. Are we in the process of becoming a better person? This is the spiritual inquiry. Are we in the process of becoming a better person? Given the freedom that most of us have to become any kind of person that we want, what kinds of choices are we making? I don't think that these are the questions that we ask only when we're young. These are questions we need to be asking on an ongoing basis throughout all of life. The Trappist monk and theologian Thomas Merton, hopefully you know of him, wrote that most of us spend our lives constructing what he called, and others too have called, the false self, which is an identity that is assembled from things like reputation, achievement, comparison to what others have, the opinions of others. The false self is built on all of these external parts of our lives. We imagine when we create this self, and most of us, we've all done it to a certain degree, of course. It's part of life here. It's woven into the material life that we live. And we may even imagine that this is a version of freedom because we choose it. We've chosen these things. We've chosen where to go to school. We've chosen what job to have. We've chosen all these different things. But a lot of us find at some point, even as we have constructed this identity or we are constructing it, that something in us remains kind of restless. There's something, we get to a point sometimes when we're really not sure why, but something inside doesn't feel quite right. It's not enough. All of this stuff. I've known so many people who have accumulated so much stuff. They have achieved incredible success in a certain capacity, and yet they find themselves feeling something's not quite right. I wonder how many of you have felt that. The life is so good, and yet. When we choose to live our lives largely on what I would call the surface of life, when we depend on things like the admiration of others or respect of someone else or permission to do things, if we allow ourselves to become defined by our titles or our degrees or our possessions, God forbid, if we are afraid of failure, if we are fearful of change, all of these things, when we're living this way, constrict our spiritual freedom. I think that's the way it happens. Our spiritual freedom becomes constricted, and that's where that angst comes from. And in some ways, because we're not allowing the deeper parts of ourselves to flourish, we end up in this sort of like prison of our own making, this discomfort that we have. Some of us, we've taken this beautiful thing called freedom, and we have chosen a small life. We have chosen to focus mainly on all the material things of this world, on the acquisition of things, on what we call ourselves, our titles, the boxes that we've put ourselves in. Oddly, it ends up spiritually constricting us. The spiritual life, as Merton taught it, is not an exercise in becoming more impressive or having more things. It is the gradual discovery that our deepest identity rests in a higher source and in a wider space. And I love that language. Our deepest identity rests in a higher source and in a wider space. It is bigger, it is more meaningful, it is more beautiful and more eternal than anything we can ever attach ourselves to here in this world. The paradox of the spiritual life is that freedom is discovered not in self-assertion, but ultimately in self-understanding. In self-understanding. Asking the questions, the big existential questions like, what am I doing here? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What do I do with all this freedom? What do I do with all this freedom? I have come to think of my own spiritual life as an ongoing discovery of truth. And I would put a capital T at the top of truth. We were all raised in a certain way, and I found in my lifetime that I looked back at the things that I was taught or the things that were just sort of placed in my life, and some of them I felt just simply couldn't possibly be true. And so it led me to start trying to discover what is truth? What is truth? It led me to different kinds of church experiences. It led me to seminary. It led me to become a chaplain. It led me in all different kinds of directions. What is truth? It includes, to be on a path of discovery like this, it absolutely means that I've had to be very honest and willing to tell myself the truth about all of the things that have happened in the past, be honest about what has happened, and also at the same time to hold an insatiable curiosity about life in general, about the bigger questions, about what goes on here, why we make the choices, all of it. Just an absolutely insatiable curiosity about life. And that really is about remaining like a child in this life. Allowing yourself to just hold that childish curiosity all the time, wherever you are, and not be embarrassed by it. It is okay to stop and look down at the ground and wonder what it is that you're seeing, or what it is you're hearing, or what it is you're looking at, or how does something happen, and where did these rocks come from, and wow, look at those. I mean, it's endless, right? I don't know when the last time was you spent time with a kid, a little kid, but everything is a miracle, isn't it? Every single thing is a miracle when you're 3 years old. One of my very favorite lines from sacred scripture comes from the Gospel of John. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And I think the order of those words is really important. Truth precedes freedom. I remember very clearly when I started talking openly and honestly about my struggles with alcohol addiction. It was one of the most freeing experiences of my life when I was ready and able to write about it and to talk about it and to talk with others about it. What I found that in speaking my own truth, it gave other people the permission to do the same thing. It allowed us to be flawed humans together, people wanting to do better together, healing. That's the name of the game. I think it's the only way to get through this hard life. I made it through this hard thing. You can too. Truth, then freedom. It is one of the most important pathways that we take towards spiritual growth. None of this, all of these kind of disparate thoughts, none of this diminishes the importance of political freedom in our lives. Do not think for 1 second that I ever underestimate the importance of the freedoms that we have in this country, the fears that they're being taken away, and the reality that every single one of us has to step up in our lives and do something about that. We have to. Political freedom becomes even more precious because it protects the space in which the deeper work of the soul is able to unfold. It protects the space that we all need to become the best version of ourselves that we can possibly be. A society that provides liberty creates room for conscience, for worship, for dissent, for inquiry, for compassion. No constitution, no written document, however brilliant, however, will ever be able to accomplish the work that belongs to the soul. That's our job. And I think this is why all of the spiritual traditions speak so very often of practice. Prayer is a practice, forgiveness is a practice, generosity is a practice, truthfulness is a practice, freedom itself is a practice. It's cultivated slowly and imperfectly, one day at a time. So, on this Independence Day weekend, it is absolutely fitting that we give thanks for all of the liberties that we've inherited and for all of those who sacrifice something in order to preserve them. We absolutely must take a moment to be grateful for those things. Certainly, an important question before us is and will remain whether our nation remains free. How much freedom? It's up to us. We make those decisions. This is where we live. The larger questions for each one of us on an individual basis are things like whether we ourselves are becoming freer, spiritually freer. Are we becoming expansive within this beautiful framework here in this world? Are we becoming freer from fear, freer from vanity, freer from the need to possess anything, freer from any illusion ever that keeps us from loving more deeply whatever our version of God is, from loving our neighbors, every one of them, with undivided hearts? That work doesn't begin and end with a national holiday. That is the work of every day of our lives, and it is the work of an entire lifetime.